Earth is not supposed to look like this. Not like an island full of trees that seem grown on another planet. Not like a red waterfall pouring out of Antarctic ice. Not like a desert gate that has been on fire for decades. And definitely not like a cave ceiling that looks more like a galaxy than solid rock. But scattered across this planet are places so strange, so visually wrong, that the first time you see them, your brain almost rejects them. They look artificial, alien, broken, like glitches in reality. And yet, they're real. These are not fantasy worlds from a movie. These are actual places on Earth. Landscapes shaped by chemistry, geology, isolation, heat, pressure, and time, into forms that seem impossible. So tonight, we're going to 7 of them. 7 places that feel less like part of our world and more like something that slipped in from somewhere else. These are 7 places on Earth that shouldn't exist. 1. Socotra Island, Yemen. If you wanted to design an island that looked fake, you would probably end up with something like Socotra. It rises out of the Arabian Sea like a biological experiment that somehow escaped normal evolution. The most famous things here are the dragon's blood trees, bizarre umbrella-shaped trees with dense tops and bare trunks that make the landscape look like a Dr. Seuss fever dream. And they're only the beginning. Socotra is packed with plant life found nowhere else on Earth. That isolation is what makes it feel so unreal. When a place remains cut off long enough, life starts taking strange turns. Species adapt to conditions in their own ways, and over enough time, an island can stop feeling like part of the same planet as everything around it. That is why Socotra is so unsettling. It's not just beautiful, it's biologically isolated enough to feel detached from ordinary Earth. When people call somewhere alien, they usually exaggerate. With Socotra, they really don't. 2. The Danakil Depression, Ethiopia. If Socotra looks too strange to be natural, the Danakil Depression looks too hostile to be part of a habitable world at all. This place is one of the hottest and most extreme environments on Earth, and it looks exactly the way you'd expect a nightmare chemical landscape to look. Neon yellows, acid greens, rust-red ground, sulfur fields, salt flats, steam rising out of cracked earth. It doesn't look like one environment. It looks like several toxic worlds smashed together. The reason is brutal geology. This region sits where tectonic forces are actively pulling the crust apart, and that deep violence rises to the surface in the form of hydrothermal activity, mineral deposits, volcanic heat, and chemically aggressive ground conditions. It is a place where Earth seems unfinished. Not calm, not stable, not settled. You look at the Danakil Depression and get the uneasy sense that the planet is still being assembled under your feet. It's one of the rare places where geology does not feel ancient and completed. It feels active, raw, almost impatient. This is not the kind of place that invites human presence. It's the kind of place that reminds you Earth can still be completely indifferent to us. 3. Blood Falls, Antarctica. There are few images on Earth more wrong than a blood-red waterfall spilling out of a glacier in Antarctica. That alone sounds impossible. Antarctica is supposed to be white, blue, and silent. Clean ice, frozen emptiness, a place defined by absence of color. And then suddenly there's Blood Falls, a red stain pouring down the side of the Taylor Glacier, like the ice itself has been wounded. For a long time it looked almost supernatural. It still does. But the reality is somehow just as strange. The color comes from iron-rich salty water emerging from deep beneath the glacier. Once that iron hits the air, it oxidizes and turns red, creating the effect of a frozen landscape bleeding into the snow. What makes Blood Falls so powerful is the contrast. It is not just red. It is red in the one place on Earth where red feels least acceptable. And beneath the visual shock is an even stranger idea. Hidden under all that ice are trapped systems, ancient water, and microbial life surviving in darkness and isolation. That means Blood Falls is not just a creepy visual anomaly. It is a leak from a hidden world. A reminder that even under Antarctic ice, life and chemistry are still doing things we once would have thought impossible. 4. Salar de Uyuni, Bolivia. At first glance, Salar de Uyuni looks like a mistake in the sky. After rain, this vast salt flat becomes one of the most perfect natural mirrors on Earth. The boundary between land and sky starts to disappear. Clouds reflect so clearly that the horizon collapses, and the world begins to look like an upside-down dream. That visual effect is what makes it feel impossible. Human eyes depend on edges, on separation, on knowing where the ground ends and the atmosphere begins. Salar de Uyuni breaks that logic. It turns the Earth into a reflective surface so smooth that perspective itself becomes unstable. People walking across it look like they're floating. Vehicles look like they're driving through the clouds. The planet stops behaving like a normal physical place. And even when dry, it still feels unreal. The salt crust stretches outward in bright geometric patterns, making the landscape seem less like nature and more like a designed simulation. This is one of those places where Earth accidentally creates optical philosophy. It doesn't just look strange. It forces you to notice how much of reality depends on the brain being able to separate surfaces, and how quickly that confidence falls apart when the planet decides not to cooperate. 5. Pamukkale, Turkey. There are mountains, and then there are places that look like frozen waterfalls made out of cloud. That's Pamukkale. From a distance, it appears almost like snow covering a hillside. But it isn't snow. It isn't ice. It isn't carved marble. It is a cascading terrace system built by mineral-rich thermal waters that have deposited brilliant white travertine over time. The result is one of the softest-looking geological formations on Earth. Pools of blue water sit inside gleaming white basins. The terraces curve downward like a liquid staircase that hardened mid-flow. Everything about it feels too delicate, too clean, too sculptural to have formed without design. That is why Pamukkale is so effective visually. It looks less like a geological process and more like architecture made by water. And that's the real theme running through so many impossible places. They seem intentional. They give the impression of artistry. We expect nature to be messy, random, and rough. Pamukkale feels composed, balanced, layered, almost ceremonial. It's one of those landscapes that makes Earth look like it has an aesthetic sense. 6. The Waitomo Glowworm Caves, New Zealand. If you walked into the Waitomo Glowworm Caves without knowing what they were, you might genuinely think you were looking at stars. Deep underground, the cave ceiling glows with countless tiny blue lights, turning solid rock into what looks like a night sky. It feels cosmic, weightless, almost peaceful, until you remember that these lights come from living larvae using bioluminescence to lure prey. That detail changes the mood instantly. What first feels magical becomes a little darker, a little more predatory. The cave is not glowing for beauty. It is glowing because life found a strange and effective strategy in total darkness. And that is why the place feels so impossible. It takes two things that should not belong together, a cave and a starfield, and merges them into one image. Underground becomes celestial. Stone becomes sky. There's something especially eerie about natural beauty when it emerges from survival mechanisms. It reminds you that the most enchanting places on Earth are not necessarily peaceful. Sometimes they are beautiful because they are efficient. And that makes Waitomo feel less like a fantasy world and more like a hidden biological machine pretending to be one. 7. The Door to Hell, Turkmenistan. Some places on Earth are strange because of natural chemistry, some because of isolation, and some because humans accidentally made the planet look apocalyptic. In the Karakum Desert of Turkmenistan, there is a massive gas crater known as the Door to Hell. It has been burning for decades, a huge pit of fire in the middle of emptiness, glowing orange against the desert night like an open furnace in the Earth's surface. Even the name sounds like it was invented by a screenwriter. And visually, it earns it. Standing near it, you are looking into a crater that appears to breathe flame. The desert around it is dark and still, which makes the fire feel even more unnatural. It looks mythological, the kind of place ancient people would have turned into a warning story. What makes it especially unsettling is that this is not some ancient volcanic gateway. It is tied to a human mistake, a collision between industrial activity and the raw energy underground. In other words, it feels like a supernatural location, but it is also a monument to human arrogance. That combination makes it unforgettable. The Door to Hell looks impossible because it takes something symbolic, the image of a burning pit in the earth, and makes it physically real, not in a legend, in a desert, on this planet. The strangest places on Earth all do the same thing in different ways. They break the visual rules. An island that looks biologically invented, a chemical wasteland that seems too extreme for life, a glacier that bleeds red, a salt flat that erases the horizon, white terraces that look sculpted by clouds, a cave ceiling that becomes a galaxy, a burning crater that looks like mythology made real. That is what makes these places so powerful. They remind us that Earth is not just beautiful. It is bizarre. Not sometimes, not rarely, consistently. And maybe that is the real reason these places stay with us. They force us to admit that the world is still stranger than our expectations for it. We like to think we understand the planet because we've mapped it, measured it, photographed it, and named everything. But then a place like this appears, and reality suddenly feels less settled, less familiar, less under control. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. Which of these places feels the least real to you, and which one would you actually dare to visit?